Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopijana Bhalava Giri Bharadhari. Jaya Gopijana Bhalava Giri Bharadhari. Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajagacharya Ashtotara Shata Shishimad, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki. ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki. Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki. Nitai Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shishiguru and Shigoranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We read them from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, General History. Chapter 5, Narada concludes his teachings to Vasudeva. Text number 8. Vadanti te nyonya upashitas triyo. Vadanti ten nyonya upashitas triyo. Griheshu maitunya pareshu cha shisha. Jayantya shantana vidana dakshinam. Brityai param grinanti pashva tatbida. Vadanti ten yoyam upashitas triyo. Griheshu maitunya pareshu cha shisha. Jayantyas Yayantyasristana vidhana dakshinam Britai param grinanti pashunatat vidam Vadanti tenyon yarupashitastriyo Griheshu maitunya pareshu cha shisha Jayantyasristana vidhana dakshina Britai parangri gananti pashunga tat vida Please chant. Vadanti tenyon yarupashitastriyo Griheshu maitunya pareshu cha shisha Yayantyasristana vidhana dakshina Britai param gananti pashunga tat vida Vadanti tenyon yarupashitastriyo Griheshu maitunya pareshu cha shisha Jayantyasristana vidhana dakshina Britai parangananti pashuna tat vida Alexander? It's a difficult one. Vadanti tenyon yarupashitastriyo Upashitastriyo. Yes, it's okay. Tunya Griheshu maitunya pareshu cha shisha Yayantyasristana vidhana dakshina Vritai param ganantya pashunga tat vida Vadanti speak te they anyonyam among each other upashitastriyaha who are engaged in worshipping woman griheshu in their home maitunya pareshu who are dedicated to sex only cha and ashishaha blessings yayanti they worship ashrishta without discharging annabidhana distribution of food dakshinam give in payment to the priest Vritai for their own livelihood. Param only gananti they murder pashun animals atabidaha in ignorance of the consequences of such behavior. Translation and purport by the disciples of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The materialistic followers of Vedic rituals, giving up the worship of the Lord, instead practically worship their wives, and thus their homes becomes dedicated to sex life. Such materialistic householders encourage one another in such whimsical behavior, understanding ritualistic sacrifice as a necessary item for bodily maintenance. They perform unauthorized ceremonies in which there is no distribution of foodstuffs or charity to the brahmanas or other respectable persons. Instead, they cruelly slaughter animals such as goats without any understanding of the dark consequences of their activities. Purport: false pride is certainly not complete without sex indulgence. Thus, lusty materialistic householders are not attracted to worship insanely persons, but rather worship their wives as a source of constant sex pleasure. The mentality of such condemned persons is described by the Lord Himself in Bhagavad Gita 16:13. Idam adhyamaya labdam imam prasye manoratam idam ashtidam apime bhavyashati punardhanam. Quote, so much wealth do I have today, and I will gain more according to my schemes. So much is mine now, and I will increase in the future more and more. End of quote. Generally, materialistic householders consider themselves to be very religious. In fact, by earning money to support a band of relatives, they consider themselves to be more pious than the, quote, irresponsible, quote, end of quote, sadhus who do not struggle to maintain family members. Worshipping the material body, they are contemptuous of the humble brahmanas who are generally not very advanced in economic development. They consider such called beggars to be unworthy objects of charity, and instead perform sacrifices only for the enhancement of the false prestige of their own family members. Madhavacharya has stated in this regard, Upeksha by harimte tu bhutva jakya patanti adaha. In spite of proudly consider themselves to be great performers of religious ceremonies, those who neglect the Lord and His devotees certainly fall down. Such foolish persons sometimes bless each other by saying, quote, may you be blessed with the wealth of gorgeous flower garlands, sandalwood pulp, and beautiful woman, end of quote. Men who are controlled by the nature of woman become exactly like woman. Materialistic women are uninterested in the devotional service of the Supreme Lord and strive for their own selfish happiness. Therefore, they eagerly take service from their husbands and become most discouraged if the husband prefers to serve the personality of Godhead. Being lost in such a fool's paradise, both husband and wife mutually encourage each other in temporary happiness. They do not like to speak or hear about the pastimes of the Lord, but prefer to discuss their own families. Still, The devotees of the Lord, being mature in the mode of goodness, are always ready to act mercifully towards such conditioned souls, who are just like vain animals. When the devotees of the Lord preach that human beings should not slaughter animals, materialistic householders are often astonished and inquire if it is actually possible to subsist on a vegetarian diet, thus being completely ignorant of the material modes of goodness. But to speak of a spiritual knowledge, such condemned materialistic have no hope beyond the mercy of the devotees of the Lord. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Ummilitam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurube Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimate Romapada Swami Iti Namine. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirveshesha Shunyavadi Pashatya Deshatarine Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. The beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam, when Srila Sukadeva Goswami arrives at the bank of the Ganges, where the great king, Emperor Maharaj Parikshit, was ready to perform austerities to prepare himself to die. This is the beginning, the end of the first canto, the arrival of Sukadeva Goswami, and the beginning of the second canto. So at the end of the first canto, Maharaj Parikshit asked the question, what is the duty of a man who is about to die? He actually placed this question in front of all the great personalities of the universe. They were the representative of all different schools of understanding of the absolute truth. Among them were great sages like Narada Muni and Vyasadeva, who representing the Bhagavad Dharma or the Bhagavad school of thought of understanding the absolute truth. Present were Gautama Rishi and Kamada and all kinds of personalities who were representing all the different approaches, including the 6 different types of philosophical schools. And all of them had an opinion that to respond to Maharaj Parikshit, what is the duty of someone who is about to die? And many of those opinions were differing from each other. They were giving different opinions what to focus. Like, for example, Vyasadeva, Narada, and all those who are followers of Bhagavad Dharma, they were saying naturally, Narada Muni, he says, you engage in hearing and chanting and remembering the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the duty of human beings, especially at the time of death. And then others say, yes, no, but one have to, they have all kinds of different opinions. And so much that at the end, they decided that no, we need one person that we all agree that will represent all of us. And we all, because it's becoming very confusing, and the emperor has only 7 days, and here we are, and I don't think we're going to come to an agreement of what is the right approach for answering and guiding the great emperor to be prepared for death. And as they were saying like that, Sukadev Goswami appeared. Anyway, it's such a wonderful story, the story of the Bhagavatam, and why Sukadev Goswami was accepted. But the point is, he answered the questions, and that's how the Srimad Bhagavatam started in the second canto. And I'm referring to this because the first instruction of Maharaj Parikshit was first to praise, of Sukadev Goswami, was to praise Maharaj Parikshit for such a question. So he said, this question is glorious, because this question is for the benefit of the whole world, for whole human society to understand. And the reason is so relevant is because this type of understanding is, for the majority of people, skips the majority of people who are absorbed in passion and ignorance, and who are afflicted by the materialistic concept of life. So he defines this exactly. Prabhupada quotes these verses so much in the Srimad Bhagavatam, second canto, first chapter, text number 2 and number 3, who describe the materialistic householder, which is quite something that our dear friends just got married, and then we're going to be talking about, the difference between the Grihastha ashram and the Grihamedi. And that's what is something that is highlighted in this verse. The materialistic absorbed householders, and how the whole thing deviates, that the whole principle in which the sanctified union of man and woman into a family becomes a place where the main purpose is sense gratification, and the worship is based not on sadhana but in sex life, is basically what it is. The term Grihamedi is a very powerful term, because Grihastha is being situated in home, but the term Grihastha is accompanied by the term ashram. Grihastha ashram. So you're situated in home to establish a place in which spiritual life is cultivated. An ashram is a place where the spiritual principles are the main goal of life. Grihamedi, on the other hand, have these two components. Griha means house, and Medi means envious of others. It's quite something. Envious of others. So, the quality of envy is very much sort of encouraged to grow when the purpose of the household is not for the pleasure of the Lord, but is for my centric sense gratification. So one of the qualities, Srila Sukadev Goswami explains that for the Grihamedis that are so engrossed in materialistic endeavors, this is what he says, Srila Sukadeva Goswami, those persons who are materially engrossed, being blind to the knowledge of the ultimate truth, have many subject matters for hearing in human society, O Emperor. So Sutravyadini Rajendra, many things that are the interest of Grihamedis, but the thing that there's no interest is in hearing about the glories of the Lord. There's no taste for that. There's no taste. And then the next verse, which Prabhupada quotes so much to define, then when there is no cultivation of hearing and chanting and remembering of the Lord in one's household, then what happened? Nidraya hidyate naktam vyavajena chavavaya. Basically, that the whole night is meant for sleeping, nidra, or for vyavajena, sex life. So the materialistic householder, basically that's their life. At night, the sleeping or sex life. And during the day, Prabhupada say, where is money? Where is money? Prabhupada gives this lecture. He's just looking for money. Where is money? Where is money? So, and they're interested in these things. So the translation, Srila Sukadeva Goswami say, the lifetime of such envious householder is passed at night either in sleeping or in self-indulgence, and in the daytime either making money or maintaining family members. This is just what we hear in this translation. Now, this section that we're reading right now, that the whole thing started just as the Bhagavatam is, a story over a story over a story. So we have the meeting of Narada Muni and Vasudeva. So Narada Muni is instructing Krishna's father, King Vasudeva, on Bhagavad Dharma. And King Vasudeva asked so many wonderful questions, and Narada answered the questions by telling the story that in which another great king asked similar questions to the great sages, the Nava-yogendras, the sons of Maharaj Priyabrata, I think Priyabrata, yes. No, Maharaj Prithu, sorry. Maharaj Prithu. So the Nava-yogendras were these great sages. And the Nava-yogendras is answering all these questions to Maharaj Nimi, who is a descendant of the dynasty of the sun, King Ikshwaku, the lineage in which Lord Ramachandra appeared, King Nimi. So the Nava-yogendras here are describing, or there's one particular actually they all take turns to ask this question, to answer the questions. The particular question that Maharaj Nimi asks, that is being dealt right now, is who are persons who are inimical to the worship of the Lord, and what is their destination? What is their future? And the reason he asked this is because the previous Nava-yogendra, the Nava-yogendra who's answering the question that is right now being dealt with, what is the destination of people who are inimical, is Chama Samuni. The previous one, I can't remember which one's the previous one, but was narrating the pastimes of the Lord, which is so attractive and so beautiful, that so inspiring, that Maharaj Nimi was so in ecstasy, and he was just wondering, who is not attractive? How is it possible that someone cannot be attracted to the pastimes of the Lord? So who are those? And Chamasamuni bring up something that is quite important to understand and very relevant. Although yesterday we were discussing in the class that Krishna Archana was given, that this is something that is happening during Tetra Yuga, way back in time. This discussion between Chamasamuni and King Nimi. But the principles that are described here are principles that are eternal, and that is part of the material world, and therefore they're very relevant for us now in Kali Yuga, and especially for us who are aspiring devotees, who are learning from the Srimad Bhagavatam, the lessons of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So there is a very important lesson that we have to understand on these teachings that we're reading now. And so who are those who are not interested? And Chamasamuni explains that is basically, he explains that within the Varnashram institution, social order, there's actually people who start to deviate from the principles and the purpose of Varnashram institution. Who are those? Who are those? He explains that he describes this in two classes of people. One that is the privileged members of the Varnashram. Privilege. The word that is used is privilege. Who are these privileged people that actually, having a privilege, they deviate and fall down? Those are, the term that is used is Srauta Jamma, which means second initiation, second birth. So are those who receive the mantra initiation, and those who actually born within the whole system of sacrifice, performing all the different samskaras, including the what is the samskara that for birth? Garbhodam samskara. All of those samskaras. These are people who are privileged. They take birth following the proper instruction of the Vedas. And therefore, they receive all the privilege that is afforded by the system that is designed by the Lord himself, the Varnashram system. And they have this privilege. What is this privilege? It's actually a Brahminical privilege, that they can understand the absolute truth. There is the capacity, there's all the facilities to understand the absolute truth. And who are those who are Srauta Jamma? They are the Brahmanas, the Kshatriyas, and the Vaishyas. So those three have privilege, have the privilege of this Srauta Jamma. Sautra Jamma. Who are the ones who have no privilege, or who are less, they don't have the same facility because of how it's designed, Sudras and women, according to the structure of this Banashram institution. So there is these two classes, the ones who are privileged and the ones who are not privileged. And the ones who are not privileged, is described that they have a better capacity to receive the mercy of the Lord. Actually, all of those who have no interest in hearing, who are too absorbed, the only way of out of that position is the mercy of the Lord. The less privileged, according to the narration of Chamasamuni, have a better opportunity to receive the mercy than those who were privileged and then discard their privilege. So in one sense, we have, in the time that we have for this class, we may discuss the fall of the twice-borns, the risk of privilege, and the mercy for the marginalized. And in one sense, the psychology of the spiritual decline, in one sense. This is something that, we can subtract from this group of verses. Actually is from text number 5 to text number 9 that Chamasamuni described this type of people. So if we do a little bit of recount of what we've been hearing these days. So in text number 5, from text number 5 to text number 9, Chamasamuni is describing the fall down of the privileged class, how they deviate, how in spite of being privileged, they neglect the worship of the Lord. In spite of having all the facilities to understand the absolute truth, they fall down. How? How does that happen? And here's the explanation. This is what Chamasamuni analyzed. And remember that it's in these three different levels. There's the Brahmanas, and the same thing applies to the Brahmanas, the same principles. But then there's the Kshatriyas. The Brahmanas are sort of, they're conditioned by the moral goodness, and Kshatriyas are conditioned by the moral, Chamasamuni explained, by the moral combination of goodness and passion, and Vaishyas are a combination of, I think, passion and ignorance, something like that. I think so. So the principles applies differently, but the principles remains the same. They all affect each one of them. So here's the first one. In text number 5, he says, Chamasamuni, that they adopt this type of fallen second birth people. They adopt materialistic, concocted philosophies. So instead of receiving the Vedas with humility, they reinterpret for the sensual benefits, for karma kanda, and for prestige. So in other words, you use knowledge because you have access to knowledge, brahmanas. You use knowledge or you misuse that knowledge. And to be able to facilitate your sense gratification, you concoct ideas. You start to speculate ideas. Sometimes we see that in order to fulfill a particular desire, we may find ourselves rationalizing how, yes, this is how I should do this. We figured it out. Rationalize. Something whimsical. But, so the misuse of knowledge. And then, in text number 6, Chamasamuni explains that you misuse the instructions of the Vedas to flatter demigods. You engage in demigod worship, and you use the demigod worship and the mantras and all these different things as a means of maintenance, as business. And so, in other words, you use it as tools for livelihood. So I can sell the worship of Surya Dev for your health. So I will do a yagya so you be healthy. Or Lakshmi, you want to be wealthy? So we do Lakshmi Puja, like that. You want to, make sure that your car is protected, so we do the coconut break it, whatever thing that it, So, and it becomes a business, it becomes a livelihood like that, brahminical activities. In text number 7, they say they become violent, lusty, angry, and mock devotees. So, yes, that was yesterday class, how this type of things happens when these fallen, materialistic, absorbed people in Vanashram, they neglect the worship of the Lord. It ends like that. And why it ends like that? Well, we're going to get into the psychology of that, but one of them, remember the term medhi, which is enviousness. So, turns into violence, lusty, anger, and start to mock the devotees. Oh, these people are good for nothing. And today is about the household life that turns into a sex center type of arrangement, and even encourage as part of religion that it becomes, something that is that type of absorption becomes, the whole center of the whole family. So homes, instead of becoming a dharmashala, a place of dharma, becomes a place of sense gratification. And so it's not a place where Krishna is seen as the master, as a center of the house. So it becomes a temple of sex and sensual gratification. And tomorrow is going to be very interesting because it's going to touch on the intoxication that comes by wealth, beauty, lineage, and rituals. There's certain intoxication. And all of these things leads to the heart of these fallen or materialistic absorbed people becomes full with pride, with arrogance, with cruelty, with blasphemy, and basically our acharyas describe it as a spiritual suicide. This is something that is described there. So there's a big risk, and this is something that we can take for ourselves, because that's just not the description for, it's easy to, say, yeah, that's describing Grihamedis. I'm a devotee. We describe ourselves as Grihastas. I just entered the Grihastha ashram. We are in the Grihastha ashram. And here is being talked about the Grihamedis. Now, before becoming a Grihamedi, these are people who are privileged in the Varnashram system. They have all the facilities. They receive all the facilities of the whole spiritual structure or social spirit, Daivi Varnashram is a divine structure that the Lord gave us to actually become Krishna conscious. And they fall down. They fall down. Why they fall down? Because there's this element that is called pride enters into. And when pride enters, then it spoils everything. Pride. The application for us. We're privileged. By great fortune, we have the privilege of having received the mercy of a pure devotee of the Lord. We're being connected to this most wonderful parampara, this lineage of saintly personalities, self-realized souls, great acharyas in this world. We're receiving through this magnificent parampara, we're receiving the mercy of Krishna. So what a privilege. What a privilege to be a devotee. We have this great privilege. But if we become distracted or become engrossed and allow pride to enter, then the whole thing is finished too. We can fall down. It can happen very easily. Just like within the whole social structure of an ashram, there are brahmanas who fall down out of pride. In the whole structure of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, we have seen there are fallen situations. And it's with pride and arrogance comes into place. So, the privilege, it won't protect us. We won't be protected if the only way we'll be protected is that we're very much fixated in the lotus feet of our spiritual master and our disciplic succession. That shelter of the spiritual master will protect us. But if we start to take ourselves out of that shelter and allow it, to start to feel pride, then we won't be protected. So privilege itself is not. So here's how the Yogendras expose 4 varieties of pride. 4 varieties of pride that we have to pay attention to. So this is especially for devotees. In the case of Chamasamuni, it's explaining about brahmanas, knowledge. When knowledge is devoid of the purpose that is for the pleasure of Krishna and for the service, and full of humility, because the counteracting part or the opposite of pride is humility. So when pride is there combined with the knowledge that we receive, then what is the result is arrogance. So this arrogance is something that all of these things, all of these different elements of pride are going to lead to cruelty, to blasphemy, to violence in different ways, and also to just hard-hearted. All of these things leads to that. So knowledge with pride becomes arrogant. And then when you have this pride also combined with the rituals that we learn, so we're being trained to perform rituals, sacrifices. Then when pride is there, I'm the pujari, I'm the priest, I'm the purahit, then it becomes a show bottle religion. Basically, it's just a display. It's a display, meaning when it's a show bottle, there's not a lot of substance. There's no spiritual substance. It's just something, it's a show in one sense. So it's ritual without humility becomes an ego performance, basically. We may see that, if we are not carefully to see our intentions while we're performing any of the activities, singing or chanting or performing a ritual, any of that, doing artik, any of that, if we don't have the proper humility, it's just an ego trip like that. Now, the pride in position, in wealth or lineage. So especially, having a particular position. I am the manager of the temple. I am, the senior this, or I'm that, or I'm this. I'm temple president, and any position like that. So, or I have wealth, if in the case of kings and administrators, or have lineage, my father or my parents are such and blah, blah. So when pride is combined with that, with position, then it becomes a sense of entitlement that leads to cruelty. Instead of helping others or honoring brahmanas, we become callous. So there's certain things that there's this callousness from the sense of I'm entitled to, and people should know that. People should know who I am. And so that's pride. And the other one is, the last one is this pride in my sensual power, and that's more on the gross side of materialistic people that are ends in this sort of sex-driving type of household life. So, these are eternal principles that we have to be careful. Pride is something that we have to make sure that we have to keep a very, very close tap on that when it pops in. Therefore, the instruction for us that is given by Srila Rupa Goswami is the instructions that Lord Chaitanya gave us. And our 6 Goswamis, they instruct us in the nectar of instruction, nectar of devotion. Srila Jiva Goswami in the Sandarbhas, all of them, that we should be more humble than a blade of grass. The principle of Trinarapi Sunichena, Lord Chaitanya. Cultivating constantly humility, cultivating constantly tolerance and respect to others. That type of thing. And then there is this sort of marginalized elements of the Varnashram society, which Krishna describes as in the Bhagavad Gita as the Sudras, women's, Dvija Bandhus, which is, the fallen Brahmanas or the son of the Brahmanas, like that. So actually, all of the people that are fallen are, but especially here, for in the Varnashram institution, the ones who were much more ready to receive the mercy of the Lord were this group in society. Now, what is the difference? The difference is when you're not privileged, there is a much better chance that you have a humble position. There is a certain sense of humility. So, a privilege, you can easily become proud. The marginalized, pride is, is easier to become, to be humble. And with that humility is what allows the mercy of the Lord to descend. And therefore, this group of persons are much more ready for receiving the mercy of the Lord. So, that's something that we can, meditate on. Prabhupada explains that even in the royal road, we can face dangers. Even receiving the mercy of the disciplic succession and being engaged and initiated in sadhana bhakti, in that royal road, we have to also be very attentive. And, the stories are there. Throughout the Bhagavatam, throughout the scriptures, there's the instructions and then of brahmanas who fell down. And one classic instruction, just I was trying to remember, and then, I was able to remember, so many are there, not only of brahmanas, but kings, personalities who were born in great lineages. Like a brahmana fall down the history in the Bhagavatam is classic one, is Ajamil. Ajamil was a very, very good brahmana, very good devotee. And simply by exposing himself to the association of sensuous people, he was finished. And it took him, so much difficulty to regain And then we have someone like King Vena. King Vena was a son of a Manu, Chakshusha Manu, one of the Manus, descendant in the lineage of Dhruva Maharaj, who was the son of King Uttapan, who was the son of Swayambhuva Manu, who was the son of Lord Brahma. That lineage, and Vena became a complete demoniac personality who have to be eliminated. So it can happen. It can happen to such people, what's to speak of ourselves. And it all have to do with the involvement of pride, loss, and all these things. So we have to be very careful. Any comments or questions? Yes, Achintya. Krishnarchana, can you get the microphone? Yes, you get it.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for the class, Subal Prabhu. So I just want to understand, so you talked about the privilege, right, that we receive either through the mercy of devotees we meet, or or through our birth, right? So when all the samskaras are performed. So I'm just trying to understand I understand that privilege is a good thing to have because you can do something like you're not entitled to, but you have this privilege, so you can have it, right? But then, is it a good thing to have this privilege? Because it's you can lose it so easily. It's like, I'm privileged to do this and that, so I'm someone special. Comparing to someone who doesn't have this privilege, and this person has to try harder, understanding that I don't have this privilege. I have to try harder because nothing comes to me very easily. Always comparing to someone who is privileged and have this, an opportunity to give a slack somewhere, I'm just trying to see. So I know that you said that it's a good thing to have, but we need to be very careful, right? And not to lose it. But as comparing to people who are not privileged, so is it good or not to have it?
My understanding is it is very good. I mean, we should the opportunity is having a great fortune, and however you receive that privilege is a fortune, and so that fortune is not the problem. Or is not the difficulty is if we are not careful to monitor, my internal world, that I allow myself to start to feel entitled or proud. If I lose the sense of humility, and the sense of humility is that I'm so grateful that how in the world I'm receiving this privilege. I'm so grateful for my fortune, and because I'm grateful, I'm see myself in one sense as a debtor to those who have given me this great privilege. So it's a principle that with that humility, I dedicate myself to the service of those who have given us this great gift, this privilege. I always remember my spiritual master sharing with us that moment in which he realized that his whole life must be dedicated to Srila Prabhupada, when he realized the privilege that he received by Prabhupada's mercy. And he explained that he took this long walk, trailing in mountains and things like that. He was just walking to this nature and, trails in this park, in mountains. And when he reached the summit and he could see the city way down there, and it was in the Buffalo University, throughout he was just, processing the whole time that he's been receiving all this opportunity. And in one sense, when he got there, he said, he started to think all the sacrifices that Prabhupada made to actually give this opportunity to him and to others. And how can he repay that? The only way he can repay that is to dedicate his life to the service of Srila Prabhupada. And in one sense, if we lose that sense of gratitude, of humility, of service to the source of that privilege, then it's finished. It's just finished. It's going to lead to offenses. It's going to lead to callousness. It's going to lead to pride. It's going to lead to all kinds of things. And we see sometimes we may even find ourselves sometimes being callous towards others. And if we find ourselves like that and we're not introspective, it can just go down the spiral. So when we caught ourselves acting with entitlement, with pride, with callousness, with all these things, we have to step back. And then, just reconnect again to the shelter, to the principles like that. Otherwise, it's not, it can happen. It can happen, and it can happen like that. So we really have to be careful. We have to constantly be reminding ourselves. And I'm talking like this, but in reality, this is something that I consider very important for myself. My spiritual master gave me that instruction: watch your intentions. In whatever I do, watch your intentions. And the intention meaning that, is it for me or is it for Krishna? When it's me at the center, then now the whole thing, I should be recognized as me, there's a fruit that I want. It's about me enjoying something. So I think it is very important. So privilege is good, and I think the problem is not about privilege or receiving privilege. The problem is how we use that privilege, or how we deal with that privilege. Yes.
had kindly explained how pride enters into the picture with the different categories of persons in the Varnashram system. And looking at the Brahmanas who have pride entering, you'd pointed out that then a kind of marketing of sacrifice takes place, meaning it becomes almost a business because there's monetary exchange for utilizing the knowledge or the skill. And then at the same time, you mentioned that there's always the protection of the spiritual master, taking shelter of the spiritual master. So just trying to think it through, the pride component taking place in the twice born, so those who have received initiation through mantra, the balance, because obviously there's purification that needs to happen. So I'm trying to look at the balance between the pride elements emerging and the shelter being taken of the spiritual master, because it seems still it's a very fine balancing thing, and obviously it relates to the internal process of the person, but it seems that pride could sweep one even quite a distance away from one's duties and proper behavior towards others. So I'm wondering how that balance really gets maintained with the pride emerging and perhaps improper behavior towards others, perhaps even a kind of monetary-oriented approach to the work one is performing, and the still the presence of the shelter of the spiritual master with that whole thing playing itself out. So I'm just thinking, does it happen that there's what you call the kind of fall that happens, or, how is it prevented? How is that balance maintained? Because pride seems like something that would really sweep one down a completely different pathway. So I'm just thinking about it.
Yeah. Sometimes I think, obviously we have, many of us, when we were in the process of becoming purified from the influence of the material nature. So many of us were not yet there in the position of transcendence. So we have to deal with all these things that are part of our material condition, which is pride, anger, envy, lust. All these things are there. And they pop, they're gonna pop some way and so other. And then what do? Well, we have to be, that's when we are very introspective. There may be situations in which I didn't have control, it just pop out. But as soon as I become aware, then I have to step back. I have to reconnect again to the position of devotional service. And the position of devotional service, as we understanding, is that, it's an identity. I am a servant. I'm doing this for a service. I'm serving my spiritual master. And this service attitude, I think, is a wonderful space of shelter, connected to the service to the spiritual master. It's like that whole thing. Whatever I do is to enhance the glories of my master, of my spiritual master. So it is service. So in one sense, the connection that I have with others is a connection of service. And having that type of place in which I can reconnect when I'm, afflicted by any of these things, I think is where the balance can be reestablished when the whole thing goes, down. Is that something that deals with that? I'm going to finish now because it's time for the Arctic. But thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.